So this video wasn't to show you how to replace a fuel pump in Cadillac. It was to show you what happens when the check valve in your fuel system fails and allows for the fuel from the carburetor to go back into the gas tank. You'll have this long cranking duration before the engine will start because there's no fuel in the carburetor. You'll know that this is a condition of your vehicle if you just put a little bit of starting fluid inside your carburetor and it fires right up. There could be a couple of other things that are going on. You need to check your ignition and you need to make sure that you have a healthy motor, because there are some things that will be masked by a warm engine versus a cold engine. But if you have a really healthy motor and for some reason out of the blue one day it just takes forever to crank after you let it sit for a while before it fires up, you most likely want to check your fuel and make sure that your fuel delivery system is in check. Behind me we have a 1962 Cadillac Series 62, and the reason I wanted to show you this vehicle in particular is that we have a pretty common issue with the fuel system, and that's that we have a failing check valve. So if you have your classic car and for some reason you get there, it cranks, it takes 30 seconds of cranking and then it fires up. But then when you're driving it, you shut it off and then it will start up immediately when it's at temperature, you most likely have a fuel delivery problem. And I'm going to show you what's happening on this car here.
Okay, so now we're looking at the fuel filter, and you can see that little bubble right there in the top corner. That means that this fuel filter is full of fuel. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this thing over, and you're going to watch it drain down because there's no more fuel behind the pump, because the poppet valve, which is the check valve for this fuel system, is allowing fuel to drain back to the tank.
So as you saw in that last clip, the fuel filter fuel level had dropped significantly. And what's causing that is the check valve in the fuel system is allowing air to come into the fuel system because it's allowing the fuel to drain itself back into the gas tank. Now if we had let this car sit for a day, maybe more, we would have had a pretty serious cranking time and it would not have started as easily. Luckily this car was started this morning, so that wasn't the case here.
I'm very sorry guys, I didn't realize that my camera was turned off while I was removing the fuel pump, but I will just walk you through how it goes pretty quickly. What I do is I just remove this hose and this hose right here, which go into the fuel pump and into the fuel filter. And then you'll have two 9/16 bolts holding the fuel pump onto the block itself. And if you look just inside here, you'll see there's a little rod, and that rod is what moves up and down based off the lobe of the camshaft. And as that moves up and down, it then actuates the fuel pump. So I'll show you guys how it all goes back together, and it's just the same as it comes apart. It's pretty straightforward.
Okay, so when you're going to install your fuel pump, what you want to do is make sure that you have a really clean mating surface. So you'll just want to take a little abrasive, I just take a little red Scotch pad, and scuff it up, get rid of all that old gasket material, and from there you'll be able to make sure you won't have any oil leaks in the future. So now that that looks pretty good and clean, I'll go ahead and grab my fuel pump assembly and my new gasket. I have my fuel pump assembly here, and I just want to go over something really quick. This knob right here needs to go on top of the rod that's sitting right inside of this little opening for the fuel pump inside the oil fill tube. That's what we're going to call it. And what happens is, as the engine runs, this little armature gets pumped up and down. It creates a low pressure system inside the fuel pump when it is elevated up, and then when it releases, it creates a higher pressure system which then pumps fuel into the carburetor. So this action is what sucks fuel out and then pumps it up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my little gasket and put it on, and then I'm going to put my bolts in just to hold the gasket in place. So gasket goes on like so, and then I'll grab my bolts and I'll put them through. Now I put just a little bit of Loctite on my bolts because of the amount of heat that goes into this block and gets heat soaked. That heat cycling can cause your bolts to back out. So I just put a little bit of blue Loctite so I can take it off. It's not going to be on there forever. And now that I have that centering my gasket, I'll be able to install it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make sure that I put it in at an angle so that this guy right here, this little arm, is able to go above the arm that drives the fuel pump. So I can feel that it's on, so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of snug up this bolt just a couple of threads before I get my other bolt in place. see here. Okay. Now that I have that centering my gasket, I'll be able to install it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make sure that I put it in at an angle so that this guy right here, this little arm, is able to go above the arm that drives the fuel pump. So I can feel that it's on, so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of snug up this bolt just a couple of threads before I get my other bolt in place. Let's see here. Okay. All right, so I got that started just a little bit, and then I'll grab my other bolt and do the same. You're going to have to push this pump down just a little bit, depending on what position the engine was turned off in. So since my rod, the rod that drives the fuel pump, is in the up position, I need to press down so I can get the bolts in. So I'm just snugging up those two 9/16 bolts that I was telling you guys about earlier that hold on the fuel pump to the oil filler neck. And I just make these good and snug. I don't really torque them down crazy. They don't have to be done that tight, but a nice snug firm feel. I would say about how you do your oil drain plug. That might be a bad indication for a lot of you guys, because I'm sure a lot of you guys over tighten it, but it doesn't need to be too tight. Just a good snug feel. Make sure that the gasket's fully collapsed, and once it's nice and tight and snug, I go about a quarter turn extra, and that's typically as tight as you need to be. Once you've done that, you're just going to hook up all your fuel hoses again and go from there. So I'm going to switch viewpoints for you. I'm just going to start with the fuel hoses and just put them back on. We're probably going to replace this fuel hose because it's getting kind of old and I'm not really trusting it too much. Now this fuel hose here is pretty nice and just goes right on top of the fuel filter. I'm just going to snug that up. Oh, you know what? I forgot my hose clamp. So I'm just going to put my hose clamp there and then snug that guy up, and then I'll pinch this, and I'll pinch this guy here and put it over. And then way in the back, we've got the third connection. Way in the back we have our third connection, which is our carburetor. And that's just going to slip on like so. And then I'll go ahead and snug that guy up. So I'm going to go ahead now and tighten all these up. Just put this clamp on, put that clamp on, and snug that guy up. Then I'm going to test to make sure that we have a good fuel pump. Because some of these pumps sit on the parts shelf for so long and they're not good right out of the box. So when you're doing one of these type of hose clamps, it's really good to have a screwdriver, because what you can do is you can use a screwdriver to press it on while you expand it. Okay, all right, now I'm happy with that, so I'm going to go ahead and grab this guy. And then I'll tighten up the last hose clamp at the back.
Now remember, this fuel line is probably only under 5.5 to maybe 7 pounds of fuel pressure. So you just want them nice and snug. This isn't like your newer fuel injection car that, you know, is running 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. And I'm not really a fan of one of these other hose clamps, so I'm just going to go ahead and replace it. Okay, so we have our new fuel pump installed. We have everything torqued down. We have all our fuel hoses put back. And we're going to try to fill this guy up right here. That's our fuel filter. So we're going to go ahead and crank it over. It's probably going to take about, I don't know, 15 to 30 seconds of cranking before we get any fuel in there. We've had the car idling for about 20 minutes. It's gotten up to temperature. Took it for a short drive around the block. We just wanted to make sure that there were no more fuel leaks and the fuel pump's working properly. So we're going to check this car, let it sit for a couple of days, make sure that the fuel pump check valve fixed our problem.